The streetlights in Kingston Corners threw pale circles onto the wet pavement as Margaret Martin stepped out into the December night. She was 19, freshly trained and proud of it. At the beginning of the month, she had finished her secretarial program at Wilkes-Barre Business College with honors, the kind of achievement that was supposed to lead straight to a desk job and a steady paycheck. She held her purse close against the cold and watched the road, waiting for the man who had called about work. An insurance office, he'd said. A private opening. He'd heard about her through the business college. Margaret was the kind of girl people described with careful words, shy, studious, friendly. She lived at home in Kingston with her parents and younger siblings, the eldest child in a Catholic family that kept routines. She went where she said she was going. She came back when she said she would. So when she agreed to meet a stranger for a job discussion, it didn't feel reckless to her. It felt like responsibility. A dark car rolled up to the curb and slowed. A man got out, neatly dressed, calm, the type who looked like he belonged behind an office counter instead of on a street corner. Witnesses would later remember his hair as light, sandy. He spoke with her briefly, as if confirming her name, as if this meeting were ordinary. Then Margaret moved toward the passenger side and climbed in. The door shut. The car pulled away into the night. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. At home, her family waited for her to return. When she didn't, hours stretched thin and frightening. Friends called, relatives checked the usual places. By the time police were notified, the town had only fragments to work with. No scream heard by neighbors, no broken glass, no obvious struggle left behind. Just a young woman gone and a family trying to explain why she would not simply disappear. The timing made everything harder. Local newspapers were in the middle of a strike, and the first hours of her disappearance did not spread through headlines the way they normally would have. Investigators had to build the case through door-to-door questions and scattered tips. They learned Margaret had told people she was meeting a man about secretarial work. She had been excited and nervous, careful in the way young women were taught to be careful, but not fearful enough to stay home. Witnesses placed her at the meeting spot in Kingston Corners. Several people said they saw her speaking to a man near a car and then getting in. They could not agree on every detail, only on the things that mattered. The man appeared to be in his mid-20s to around 30, slightly overweight, smooth in his manner. The car was a dark sedan. Some said a brown Plymouth. Others insisted it was black. No one caught a license plate. No one followed. The car simply absorbed her and vanished. Pennsylvania State Police and local officers searched the roads and the surrounding countryside. They checked bus depots and train stations. They questioned men with records, men reported for prowling, men whose names surfaced in gossip. The theory that she had run away never held up. Margaret was known as steady and devoted to her family. There was no money missing, no packed suitcase, no note. Every hour that passed made the unknown feel heavier. Days slid by. The fear changed shape. People began watching their daughters more closely. Parents repeated warnings about strangers with friendly voices and offers that sounded too convenient. And then, 4 days after Margaret had stepped into that sedan, the search took a turn that erased any remaining hope. In a remote stretch of Wyoming County, in Northmoreland Township, a teenager named Anthony Rezakowski was out near a creek trapping muskrats. The area was wooded and quiet, the kind of place where the world felt far away. In the water, he noticed something that didn't belong, what looked like a burlap bag, partially submerged, heavy enough that it sank into the current instead of floating free. When he moved closer, the sight stopped him cold. Inside the bag was a human body. Troopers and coroner's personnel arrived and waded into the creek. The victim was unclothed, badly injured, and it was immediately clear this was not an accident. Identification came quickly enough to shatter the community. The body was Margaret Martin. She had been dead at least a day. Her injuries showed she had been beaten and strangled, and investigators described knife wounds as well. The violence was close and personal, the kind that left no room for misunderstandings about what had happened to her. The location raised new questions. The creek was roughly 25 miles from Kingston. Whoever killed her had driven deep into back roads, into terrain that suggested familiarity, or at least confidence. Yet there were no clear tire tracks near the spot where the bag had been found, no obvious trail to follow back to a road. The burlap itself offered no easy identification. Officers flooded the area anyway, combing brush and banks, looking for scraps of clothing, footprints, any trace that could point back to the man in the sedan. Rumors surged as fast as the manhunt. Some people believed a group of men had been luring young women with promises of work. Others insisted the killer had to be local, someone who knew the sawmills, the dirt roads, the hidden creeks behind the hills. Investigators chased each lead hard. Reports surfaced of men who had tried to entice another teenage girl with a supposed job interview. Traveling salesmen were questioned. Hotel registers were examined. Tips poured in about suspicious cars and men seen watching girls from sidewalks and stoops. Hundreds of people turned out for Margaret's funeral in Kingston, the church packed with grief and anger. Plainclothes officers moved through the crowd, watching faces, studying who lingered, who stared too long, who seemed less like a mourner and more like someone checking whether the town was still looking for him. Nothing came from it. The killer did not reveal himself. In the weeks that followed, authorities explored a theory that Margaret had been taken to an isolated sawmill before her body was dumped. Investigators looked into reports of disturbed ground and burned cloth near a mill in the Forkston area. They investigated whether a mill owner had fired a warning shot at a trespasser around the time they believed Margaret was killed, possibly scaring someone off before he could dispose of evidence. The story fit the geography and the desperation of a man trying to erase a crime, but it never became proof. The case stayed alive with periodic jolts, new rumors, new names, a claim of responsibility that collapsed under scrutiny. Years later, a man even confessed, only for investigators to determine he could not have done it. Each time the town braced for resolution, and each time the answer slipped away. What remained consistent was the beginning. A young woman trained for office work, lured by a phone call and a promise that sounded legitimate, stepped into a car with a stranger and disappeared. The story became a warning in northeastern Pennsylvania, passed from parent to child with the details intact because the ending never changed and the person responsible never answered for it. The distance between Kingston Corners and that creek in Wyoming County was only a drive, but it held an entire crime no one could reconstruct. Someone built a trap out of a job offer, and Margaret Martin walked into it believing her life was about to open up. Instead, it closed in silence, and the question of who took her remained unanswered. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.